program, I would like to introduce the next speaker. That's Nikki Rommers. She used to be within our department for a few months. She's a physiotherapist, actually Dutch, but doing a PhD in Belgium, University of Ghent and University of Brussels. And as a little further information, she will defend her PhD publicly next Monday. So I think this is a general rehearsal. The screens is yours, Nikki.
Yeah, thank you, Evert, for the introduction. I will talk you through one of my PhD papers where we actually applied a machine learning approach to assess injury risk in youth football players. So a little bit of background. From the age of 8 onwards, professional clubs select the most talented players for a place in their youth academy. So these players within the youth academy will then follow a specialized development program that is characterized by early specialization, many hours on the pitch, to participate in very intense training and match sessions. So as you could imagine, these youth development programs are also related to a very high injury rate. To put these in numbers, I took the data from my study, which is focused on players between 9 and 15 years of age. When we look into the injury incidence, I found an incidence of 4.3 injuries per 1,000 hours of football, or approximately 1 injury per. However, if we separate this in the different age categories, there is large differences between the under 10 and the under 15 players. So the injury incidence increases a lot with increasing age. Another measure for injuries is the injury burden, that is the days of absence per 1,000 hours. And in our study, this was 82.5 days per 1,000 hours of football, or approximately 10 days per player season. Also here, we see the trend of increase with increasing age. So I guess these numbers provide the information that injury prevention is kind of necessary in this population. However, when we asked the participating youth academies what they actually do for screening and injury risk management up to the under 15 age categories, we were quite disappointed by the results. So only few youth academies actually have injury risk management initiatives put in place. They also told us that there is little time and money for actual screening tests. However, they do follow up the physical fitness and growth of the players, but this is more or less for selection purposes. So based on this, we came to the conclusion that if we want to do injury screening in this population, we would need to use very easy screening tests. So therefore, we went back to what the youth academies actually do already. So they monitor physical fitness, motor coordination, growth, and maturation for their selection, for their yearly selections. So in this study, we aimed to use the same variables to investigate whether we could predict injury based on this. And also, if we would be able to distinguish overuse from acute injuries. Because in the 9 to 15-year-old population, especially the growth-related overuse injuries cause a severe problem. So especially these injuries are important for risk management. So we had a pretty large study. We were lucky that 7 Belgian youth academies were willing to participate in our study. And within each youth academy, 6 individual teams participated. So we had the under 10 to under 15 team of each youth academy. In total, our sample included 734 players who were monitored during the entire 2017-2018 season. During the preseason, all of these players underwent the same test battery where we took anthropometric data. We performed a simple motor coordination test battery and conducted some field tests to test the strength, speed, agility, endurance, and flexibility of the players. Then, during the entire season, we followed up all medical attention injuries. So in the youth academies that participated, it is normal that a member of the medical staff is present during each training session and each game. And the players also have to go see the medical staff members if they are unable to participate. So this means that we are pretty sure that we have all medical attention as well as all time injuries covered in this study. However, for our analysis, we only used the first injury for each player, which is pretty important for our machine learning model. So our aim was to predict injuries using machine learning. We decided for this purpose to use a boosted regression tree, so the XGBoost model. This is a model that is known for its high prediction accuracy, a very good computational speed, and it's also pretty easy to use. So you can tweak a lot of parameters in the model. It's relatively flexible, and you can pretty easily control for overfitting. So for our purpose, this seemed to be the best idea. So we had our complete database of 734 players that we split into a training data set and a test data set. So the data of 80% of the players were in our training data set and were then used to build our predictive models. So while training the models, we used cross-validation to check the predictive accuracy of the model in the meantime. And when we found our best model, we went back to our test data to actually test how well our model performs in an unseen data set consisting of 20% of our original data set. So in our first model, we wanted to predict injury. So we wanted to classify whether a player would be injured or non-injured. Well, we had a very balanced data set. So 15% of our players actually sustained one or more injuries during the season. And with the machine learning model, with the XGBoost model, we were able to reach a specificity, sensitivity, and accuracy of 85% in the prediction of injury. The most important variables in this were the age at peak height velocity, the body height of the player, the leg length, the fat percentage, and the standing broad jump result. So it's pretty much a mix of anthropometric measures and a performance test. Then for our second model, we only used the injured players, and we wanted to assess whether they were, if we could distinguish between overuse and acute injuries. Because again, it's especially these acute injuries that we consider important and of which we really want to manage the risk. Also here we had a balanced data set with 47% of all injuries being overuse injuries. Again, we reached a pretty high predictive accuracy with a specificity, sensitivity, and accuracy of 78%. The variables that were most important here are slightly different. So again, we have the age at peak height velocity as the most important predictor, followed by moving sideways, which is a motor coordination test, sitting height, a sprint test, and an agility test. So awesome results. We are actually able to predict injury with a pretty high accuracy. But what can we do with it? So actually, I could say to a coach or to a medical staff member, well, this player is very likely to get injured, and he will most likely sustain an overuse injury. Well, the logical question from a coach will be then, yeah, okay, what can I do about this? So therefore, we want to explore the model a bit further to be able to translate it into practice. Because what coaches and medical staff members want is risk factors they can work upon. They want to know a strategy to actually reduce the risk of injury in these players. So we try to visualize the interpretation of the model using a SHEP approach. So that's this complicated plot you see on the left side that actually contains a lot of interesting information. So first of all, it contains the 20 most important variables in our model ranked by importance. So age at peak height velocity was the most important predictor. And on the 20th place, we have age. These are only the 21st variables in our model. Obviously, we had even more variables taken out of our preseason test battery. So this is not a complete picture. Behind each variables, there is 734 dots drawn. So there's a dot for each player. So you could actually extract the individual player results from it, or you could draw such a graph for individual players. And the dots are placed at the Shep value. So this is kind of a rather meaningless number, but the higher the absolute value, so whether it is negative or positive, the more impact this value has on the prediction outcome. So for example, this dot over here is puts pretty much as much right as we can, as we have in this plot, probably had a large influence on the decision of the player that is probably most likely classified as being injured. Well, our final step in the interpretation of the model is the direction of the effect. And also this we could learn from our summary plot. So the value of each feature is indicated by a color, where the pink dots represent the high values and the blue dots represent the low values. So for example, a tall player who has a high body height will have a pink dot, whereas the short players will have a blue dot. So putting this all together, we could actually assess the injury risk and give coaches something to work with and give them real risk factors. We also tested this by comparing the outcomes of this machine learning model by some traditional statistics. And we actually came to the same results. So that was pretty interesting. So when we look into the risk factors, first we need to see that there is quite a few in the model. And we can identify a risk factor, but we always have to take into account that the outcome of a model is based on all the elements that are in. So it is not only because of, for example, a high peak height velocity that a player is likely to get injured. It's a combination of everything, and it's very difficult to unravel the complete model. However, what we do see is that the most important variables in our case were anthropometric variables. And if we look at the values, we see based on this that the injury risk is likely to increase with increasing age. So for age at peak height velocity, we know that the older players have a higher predicted age at peak height velocity. So the pink dots are here. And the pink dots are on the side of injury. The same we see for body height. So the pink dots are mostly concentrated on the right side, whereas the blue ones are on the left side. However, this is not the case for all variables. So for example, the standing broad jump, the worst jumping performers are more likely to get injured. So as I said earlier, with traditional Cox models, we actually found the same risk factors. So we found the same factors that show significance in our models. So this could be interesting and give us a hint that we are actually able to interpret these results. But we have to be cautious if we actually want to put this into practice. We need to keep in mind that the aim of this predictive modeling is actually to distinguish two groups. So we want to look at specific features of the injured players and the non-injured players. And since we did not have strict cutoff values, we entered continuous variables in the model. And so in our decision tree, some artificial cutoff values are made. And we could not really be certain that actually from that certain value, the risk is high. So this becomes more intuitive when we look at our second model, where we wanted to separate the overuse from the acute injuries. So from a clinical background, we would always say that there is probably some similar risk factors for overuse and acute injuries. However, in our machine learning model, we actually wanted to separate these. So for example, if we look at age in our plot, we see the pink dots on the right side. So having a higher age made a player more likely to have an acute injury, whereas a lower age would attribute to a higher risk of classification as an overuse injury. But we do know that this is not the case, that the risk of both overuse and acute injuries increases with increasing age, and that overuse injuries are also a particularly large problem in the oldest age groups that we studied. So therefore, always be careful interpreting the models and when bringing them to practice. But since we need to be cautious, well, what can we learn from it? So it is a practitioner could use the results of this model to make the screening process more efficient. So the result we basically get out of this is whether a player will get injured or not, and whether this is most likely an acute or an overuse injury. So we are able to identify the players with a higher risk of injury. And as I said before, the Belgian youth academies only have limited resources for screening. This simple machine learning model based on a test battery they already do allows them to focus the available resources on the players with the highest risk. So they do not have to extensively screen everyone, but maybe they could focus on certain players that we found have the highest risk. In that way, they could also target the injury risk management specifically at the players at risk by, for example, giving them individualized injury prevention exercises above what might be done already team-based. But there is a very large limitation on this. We have to keep in mind that the result of this machine learning model will not explain us why the injuries happen. So we can only find out which players most likely get injured, but it's very hard to tell a coach on an individual basis what the weaknesses are and what he should work upon. So it does not give an answer on any causal questions related to injuries. And so our model is already performing pretty well, but still we need to do some steps to actually bring it to practice and make it valuable for the youth academies as such. So first we need to validate the model. So we had a tiny little test data set consisting of 20% of our data, but in order to make sure that the model actually works, we want to validate it with a new data set. So we could, for example, take the data from the season after the one we followed, or use data of different youth academies. We then also want to check the accuracy of the model with less variables, because what we did is perform a test battery, basically put everything into our model, and then look what our outcome would potentially be. But our test battery took 1.5 hours per team to perform. So it's probably more valuable if we could shorten this a little bit. So we could also keep the temporality of injuries into account and, for example, perform the test battery more often. And then finally, we included all types of injuries. So this was good because it created a very balanced database. However, we are probably more interested in risk management of certain types of injuries, such as the growth-related overuse injuries in our sample, or think about muscle injuries in a professional football players. So there's still some work to do. However, if we look at it from a practical perspective, like in a practical sample of a youth academy or of a club in general, as what has been said before by the other speakers, we usually need a very large data set to perform, to build such models. So this either means that we have to collect data on a very regular basis. Like if we, for example, use exposure data or training load data based on the GPS, we kind of have a single line per player per week. So then you get a large database pretty fast. If you want to use a pre-season screen or very extensive screening battery, you probably do it once a year. And then you need many years of data collection before you actually have a large enough database. And in the meantime, the policies have changed already. So the question remains whether this would be useful. A last option would be a collaboration between clubs or initiatives from the federation, such as what we had in this study. However, this is often not very easy in a competitive environment. So we were very lucky in this study that we were able to include so many youth academies. And then also, since I come from a physiotherapy background and probably most staff members of football clubs are not mathematicians, I think it is quite necessary to set up collaborations with data scientists, because there is a large variety of machine learning approaches that can be used, and I feel you really need an expert in the field to be able to select out the model of best fit. So for today, we can conclude with some take-home messages. In this study, we were able to show that a simple test battery can predict injury in youth football players with a pretty high accuracy. So it is possible to predict injury, which is good news. And this injury prediction could make our screening and injury risk management process more efficient in the field. So I guess I can conclude that data science offers a very valuable addition to sports medicine. However, we do need to keep in mind that this is not the holy grail. We can basically inform coaches which players will get injured, but we still don't know why injuries happen and what the causes are. So in that regard, we need different methods to get a comprehensive view on injuries.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was amazing. And I think you did a massive work and impressive, because I think you balance sports physiotherapy with data science. So congratulations on that. And of course, you have a lot to learn from now, but I think your study has shown to us some nice and potential results related to risk assessment. So thank you so much. And I'll have some questions and some brainstorm that we can discuss here. And the first one, you as a sports physio, if you take your results into practice, if you could use that result into practice. So after the screening session, the screening procedure, what do you use to do some prevention or individual prevention, as you said, based on your results in this sample size?
Yeah, well, we still need to keep in mind that actually what we did is mainly a performance test battery, and we also did some causal inference techniques using the same database, and actually we did not find any significant associations between the modifiable risk factors. So I still feel we need to go back to our experience as a physiotherapist and do a comprehensive screening. Do comprehensive screening tests and check out what the potential weaknesses are in relation to age, in relation to performance level, and what's necessary for that player. So it is very useful. Like I said, I really feel that we could kind of distinguish the players who have who really needs a screening more than others. So we could use our time more efficiently. So we don't have to screen every single player for 1 full hour, for example. But I still feel that the physio knows best, and we should keep doing our screenings.
Okay, thank you. So just one more question related to the methods. You said that you used official cutoff points. So I'm curious about that, because when I used to use CART, that is also a decision tree, but in CART, the analysis automatically shows the cutoff point. We cannot input the cutoff point. So what was your rationale to choose those cutoff points?
Well, actually, in this analysis, the cutoff points were also automatically determined. So I have continuous measures. So for all the tests, like basically body height, it's a continuous measure over an entire range. And I felt that we were not able to set cutoff points for risk because there is no literature in that regard. So therefore, I used the continuous measures, and then the analysis indeed just creates cutoff points by itself And that all happens automatically. It's kind of a semi-black box. So I'm not really confident in using them to practice and really telling a coach like, okay, this is my decision tree. And because this value is below or above this value, the decision has been made, like we saw in Alessio's presentation. Mm-hmm. I do not feel that really translates to reality and injury risk. So I prefer to keep it kind of in the black box rather than telling the coaches or the medical staff members what our cutoff values actually were.
But do you think that if we could improve our models, like doing the cross-validation or external validation, maybe we could try to find some cutoff point that could be standard for that specific age, or like in blood exam in cardiovascular, we have cutoff point related to cholesterol or blood pressure, something like that.
Yeah, but also there, I mean, a cutoff point is somehow an artificial value. If you are just below the cutoff, you have low cardiovascular risk, and if you're just above, you have a high risk. Don't tell me there is much difference between these two people. But it would help practitioners, obviously, because they want to make decisions and they want to have easy guidelines. So a cutoff point would be very useful, but I'm personally not sure in this population if we will be able to really come with comprehensive cutoff points that are practical to use in reality and that could really indicate injury risk. So baby steps, and maybe then we get somewhere.